I shivered as the wind whipped through the trees, sending a shower of leaves cascading to the ground. I was lost. I had been hiking for hours, and the sun was starting to set. I knew I should turn back, but I was afraid of getting even more lost. I kept walking, hoping to find my way back to the trail. But the trees all looked the same, and I just kept getting more and more lost. As night fell, the temperature dropped. I was wearing only a light jacket, and I started to get cold. I found a fallen tree to sit on and huddled under my jacket. I tried to stay calm, but I couldn't stop thinking about all the things that could go wrong. I could freeze to death, or I could be attacked by an animal. I could even starve to death. I closed my eyes and tried to sleep, but I couldn't. I was too scared. I lay there for hours, listening to the wind and the sounds of the forest. Every little noise made me jump. Finally, I heard a noise that made my blood run cold. It was a low, guttural growl. I froze, my heart pounding. The growl came again, closer this time. I knew I had to do something. I couldn't just sit there and wait to be killed. I got up and ran, not knowing where I was going. I just had to get away from that sound. I ran for what felt like hours, until I couldn't run anymore. I collapsed on the ground, gasping for breath. I lay there for a long time, too scared to move. Finally, I gathered my courage and got up. I had to find shelter for the night. I found a small cave and crawled inside. I was exhausted, but I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the growl I had heard. I knew that whatever had made that sound was still out there. And I was all alone. I huddled in the corner of the cave, trying to stay warm. I closed my eyes and prayed for morning to come. I don't know how long I slept, but I was awakened by the sound of voices. I opened my eyes and saw two men standing in the entrance to the cave. "Are you okay?" one of the men asked. I nodded, too scared to speak. "We found your backpack," the other man said. "We figured you might be around here somewhere." I was so relieved to see them. I had been sure I was going to die out there. The men helped me out of the cave and took me back to their camp. They gave me food and water, and I told them what had happened. They stayed with me until the next morning, when a search party found me. I was so grateful to be alive. I had learned my lesson. I would never go hiking alone again. But I will never forget that night, the night I was trapped in the wilderness and came face to face with my worst fear. I've always loved hiking. There's something about being in the wilderness, surrounded by nature, that just feels peaceful and calming. But one hike I went on a few years ago turned out to be anything but peaceful. I was hiking in a remote area of the mountains, and I had been hiking for hours. The sun was starting to set, and the shadows were getting longer. I was starting to get a little bit worried that I was lost. I stopped to take a break and look at my map. I was definitely lost. I didn't recognize any of the landmarks. I tried to retrace my steps, but I just got more and more confused. I started to panic. I was all alone in the middle of nowhere, and it was getting dark. I didn't know what to do. I decided to keep hiking, hoping that I would eventually find my way back to the trail. But as the sun set, the darkness became even more oppressive. The shadows seemed to come alive, and I started to imagine all sorts of terrifying things lurking in the darkness. I heard strange noises all around me. The wind howled through the trees, and the branches creaked and groaned. I thought I saw something move in the bushes, but I couldn't be sure. I was so scared that I could barely keep going. I just wanted to find a place to hide and wait for morning. Finally, I came to a clearing. In the middle of the clearing was a small cabin. I ran to the cabin and pounded on the door. No one answered. I tried the doorknob, and it was unlocked. I opened the door and went inside. The cabin was dark and dusty. There was a fireplace in the corner, and I built a fire to keep warm. I sat down on the floor and tried to calm down. I was exhausted, but I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about all the strange noises I had heard. I was sure that something was out there, watching me. I finally fell asleep, but I had nightmares all night long. In the morning, I woke up and went outside. The sun was shining, and the birds were singing. The world seemed so different from the way it had been the night before. I went back to the cabin and packed up my things. I was determined to find my way back to the trail. I hiked for hours, and finally, I came to a familiar landmark. I had found my way back to the trail. I was so relieved. I had survived my terrifying experience, and I was never going to forget it. I've always loved hiking, and I'm always looking for new trails to explore. One day, I was browsing online when I came across a trail that looked perfect. It was called the Beyond the Path Trail, and it was located in a remote area of the woods. The description said that it was a challenging hike, but I was up for the challenge. I packed my gear and set off early the next morning. The trail started out easy enough, but it soon became more difficult. The path was steep and narrow, and the trees were so thick that it was hard to see the sun. I started to feel a little uneasy, but I kept going. After a while, I came to a fork in the trail. The sign said that the left fork led to the summit, and the right fork led to Beyond the Path. I hesitated for a moment, but then I decided to take the right fork. The right fork was even more challenging than the left. The path was overgrown and full of rocks, and I had to climb over several fallen trees. I was starting to get tired and discouraged, but I kept going. Finally, I came to a clearing. In the middle of the clearing was a small cabin. The cabin was old and abandoned, and it looked like it hadn't been used in years. I cautiously approached the cabin and peered inside. It was dark and dusty, and there was nothing inside but a few old pieces of furniture. I was about to turn and leave when I heard a noise behind me. I spun around, but there was nothing there. I started to feel really scared, and I wanted to run away. But I forced myself to stay calm and investigate. I followed the sound to the edge of the clearing. There, in the woods, I saw a path. The path was narrow and winding, and it disappeared into the darkness. I knew that I shouldn't go down that path, but I couldn't help myself. I was drawn to it. I started walking down the path. The trees were so close together that I could barely see the sky. The air was cold and damp, and it smelled like decay. I started to feel like I was being watched, but I couldn't see anything. I walked for what felt like hours. The path was endless, and I was starting to lose hope. I was about to turn back when I saw something in the distance. It was a light, flickering in the darkness. I walked towards the light. As I got closer, I saw that it was coming from a small window in the side of a hill. I peered through the window, and I saw a room. The room was filled with strange objects, and there was a figure sitting in the corner. The figure was hunched over, and it was wearing a long black cloak. I couldn't see its face, but I knew that it was watching me. I felt a chill run down my spine, and I knew that I had to get out of there. I turned and ran. I ran back down the path, and I didn't stop until I was back at the fork in the trail. I took the left fork and ran until I came to the main trail. I didn't stop running until I was back at my car. I got in my car and drove away. I didn't look back. I never went back to that trail, and I never told anyone what I saw. But I'll never forget the Beyond the Path trail, and the thing that I saw in the cabin.